Pregnant and rejected, she lay alone in the wilderness, waiting only for death. But a lone Apache warrior knelt before her and swore to protect that baby as if it were his own flesh and blood. The Arizona sun beat down like a branding iron on Clara's skin as she collapsed onto the stony ground. There were no more tears, only the suffocating weight of 8 months of pregnancy and the bitter certainty that she was utterly alone in the world. At 23, Clara's face bore the marks of someone always considered the less attractive daughter, the one left over. Dull brown hair, eyes too small, an awkward body. The Miller family never hid their disappointment when she became pregnant by Joe Jedediah Thorne. The town merchant's son, everyone expected him to do the right thing, but Jedediah fled like a coward in the dead of night, leaving only a cold letter. "I cannot marry you. My father would never accept it." Clara's father exploded in fury. Her mother wept with shame. Her siblings refused to look her in the eye. "You've dishonored this family," her father said, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Get out. We don't want to see your face again." And there she was, walking for 3 days through the scorching desert, without water, without food, without hope. Her heavy belly ached with every step. The baby moved restlessly, as if feeling its mother's despair. Clara fell to her knees first. Then her whole body collapsed onto the dry earth. The sun hammered her back. Thirst burned her throat. Her lips were cracked, her skin red from the sun. "Forgive me," she whispered to the child growing inside her. "Forgive me for not being able to give you a better life." She closed her eyes, hoping death would come swiftly, but what came instead was the sound of slow footsteps on the earth. Clara opened her eyes with effort. A shadow fell over her. She lifted her face and saw a man with dark skin, long black hair, a strong body, and scars on his arms. He wore simple leather clothes and looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Apache. She knew by his features, his posture, the way he moved in absolute silence. Fear should have gripped her. Everyone said Apaches were wild, dangerous, that they killed white people without mercy. But Clara felt no fear. Perhaps because she had nothing left to lose. The man knelt beside her. His eyes were dark as night, but held no cruelty. There was something there Clara recognized immediately. Pain. The same pain she carried, only older, deeper. He said nothing. He only touched her forehead with his hand, feeling the fever. Then he looked at her swollen belly and frowned, concerned. Clara tried to speak, but only a hoarse moan escaped. The man quickly stood and returned with a gourd full of fresh water. He helped her sit up and brought the water to her lips. "Slowly," he said, his voice deep and careful. It was the first word she had heard in 3 days. Clara drank as if it were the first water of her life. The relief was immediate. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. The man waited for her to drink until she was satisfied. Then he helped her to her feet with gentle movements, holding her arm firmly. "I am Nahuel," he said simply. "Clara," she whispered, her voice still weak. Nahuel nodded once, as if that was enough. He looked around, assessing the terrain, then pointed in a direction. "Come, it's not safe here." Clara tried to walk, but her legs wouldn't support her. Nahuel picked her up without hesitation, as if she weighed nothing. Clara stiffened. She wasn't used to kindness, much less from a stranger. "I won't hurt you," Nahuel said, sensing her tension. "Neither you nor the baby." There was something in his voice that made Clara believe him. She relaxed in his arms, and for the first time in months, felt safe. Nahuel walked for almost an hour, carrying her through the rocky desert terrain. He said nothing more, but Clara felt that he was constantly alert, observing every movement around them. They finally arrived at a small cabin hidden among the hills, almost invisible among the rocks and cacti. It was simple, made of adobe and wood, but it looked solid and cool. Nahuel carefully placed her on a cot covered with clean blankets. The cabin was Spartan. only what was necessary to survive, but it was clean and organized. "Rest," he said, covering her with a soft blanket. Clara closed her eyes, exhausted. When she woke, it was already night, and a small fire warmed the room. Nahuel was sitting on the other side of the cabin, stirring something that smelled like herbs. He approached with a steaming bowl. "Drink. It's good for you and the baby." Clara drank the tea in silence. It tasted bitter, but she felt better almost immediately. Nahuel returned to his place and watched the fire, lost in thought. "Why did you help me?" Clara asked, breaking the silence. Nahuel took a moment to answer. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't expected. "Because I've seen women die alone in the desert, and I've seen babies who never had a chance to be born." Clara realized there was much more to this story, but she didn't ask. Just as he didn't ask why she was alone, pregnant, dying in the middle of nowhere. They had this in common: too much pain to be explained with words. In the following days, Nahuel cared for her with a patience Clara had never experienced. He brought fresh water every morning. He prepared herbal teas that eased her pains. He hunted rabbits and small birds, cooking them with seasonings that made the food delicious. But most importantly was the way he treated her. Not with pity, not as a burden. Simply with respect. Clara began to regain her strength. Color returned to her face. The baby moved more calmly inside her, and for the first time in months, she managed to smile. "You don't have to do this," she said one afternoon, seeing Nahuel return from hunting with 2 rabbits. "I don't have to," he agreed, cleaning the animals with skillful movements. "But I want to." "Why?" Nahuel stopped working and looked her in the eyes. For a moment, Clara saw through the mask of silence he always wore. She saw a man who had lost everything he loved. A man who carried guilt and regret like stones in his chest. "Because perhaps that's what my wife and son would have wanted me to do." Clara's heart ached. Now she understood his gaze, the pain she recognized on the first day. Nahuel had also lost his family. "What happened to them?" she asked softly. Nahuel's face closed off again. He returned to cleaning the rabbits in silence. Clara thought he wouldn't answer, but then his voice emerged, low and controlled. "Soldiers, they attacked our village at dawn. I was hunting far away. I returned when it was too late." He paused, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. "My wife, Ayana, was 7 months pregnant. My son, Koa, was only 3 years old." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Clara felt tears stream down her face. Not just for his story, but because she finally understood why he had saved her. "You saved me because you couldn't save them," she said, almost whispering. Nahuel nodded once, without looking at her. Clara slowly stood and walked to where he was. Nahuel tensed as she approached, like a wild animal ready to flee. But Clara simply placed her hand over his, gently. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me the chance they didn't have." Nahuel looked at their hands, touching. His breathing grew heavier. For a moment, Clara thought he would pull away, but he didn't. He just closed his eyes, and for the first time since they met, Clara saw a tear roll down his face. That night, sitting around the campfire, they talked as they hadn't talked before. Clara told him about her family, about Jedediah, about how she had always felt invisible in the world. Nahuel spoke about his life before the tragedy, what it was like to be an Apache warrior, how he loved his wife, how his son laughed when he returned from hunting. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't passion. It was something deeper, 2 wounded hearts finding comfort in each other's pain. When Clara fell asleep that night, Nahuel stayed awake, watching her sleep. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't dream of blood and death. He dreamed of the future, but neither Clara nor Nahuel knew that just 2 days' ride away, Jedediah Thorne had returned to the territory with a group of armed men. And he wasn't looking for Clara to apologize. He was looking for a far more dangerous reason. 2 weeks had passed since Nahuel found Clara in the desert. The sun still burned brightly every morning, but now Clara woke with hope instead of despair. Her belly had grown even larger. The baby moved constantly, especially when she talked to Nahuel. It was as if the child recognized his voice. "I think he likes you," Clara said one morning, watching Nahuel prepare breakfast. "How do you know it's a boy?" he asked, stirring a pot of corn porridge. Clara smiled, a true smile, unlike any she had ever given. "I don't know. It's just a feeling." Nahuel brought the food and sat beside her. In recent days, he had started sitting closer. Not too close. There was still a respectful distance between them, but Clara noticed that he no longer shied away from her accidental touch. "What if it's a girl?" Nahuel said, watching Clara eat. "Then she'll be a strong warrior, like the father who's taking care of her." The words came naturally from Clara's mouth, but as soon as she said them, she realized what she had spoken. Nahuel was not the baby's father, but in those 2 weeks, he had been more of a father to this child than Jedediah ever would be. Nahuel stopped eating. His eyes grew serious but not angry. There was something there Clara couldn't quite identify. "Clara," he said slowly, "you know I know," she interrupted him. "You're not the father, but you've been everything a father should be." Nahuel swallowed hard. He raised his hand as if to touch her face, but stopped midway. "I don't know if I can—" "I'm not asking for anything," Clara said softly. "I'm just telling the truth." At that moment, Clara felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. She moaned and clutched her belly with both hands. Nahuel immediately stood up, alarmed. "What is it?" I think the baby's coming," Clara said, breathing heavily. For the next 6 hours, Nahuel didn't leave her side. When the contractions grew stronger, he held her hand and let her squeeze with all her might. When she cried out in pain, he murmured words in Apache she didn't understand, but which calmed her. When the baby finally arrived, a small but healthy boy, Nahuel was the one who picked him up first. His large, calloused hands held the child with a tenderness that made Clara weep. "He's perfect," Nahuel said, placing the boy in her arms. Clara looked at her son. He had dark eyes like hers, but something in the shape of his face reminded her of Jedediah. For a moment, she felt a pang of bitterness. But when she saw Nahuel looking at the baby with such affection, the bitterness vanished. This man had been present at her son's birth. He had held her hand through the pain. That was worth more than any blood. "What will you name him?" Nahuel asked. Clara thought for a moment. She had considered several names during her pregnancy, but now only one made sense. "Michael," she said. "My grandfather's name. The only man in my family who was ever kind to me." Nahuel nodded in approval. Then he stood. "I'll get fresh water and herbs to help with your recovery." When he left, Clara was alone with the baby for the first time. Michael slept peacefully in her arms. She kissed his small forehead and whispered, "You're lucky, my son. You have a man of honor looking after us." But the peace was short-lived. Nahuel rushed back into the cabin, his face tight with worry. "We have to leave here," he said, grabbing a leather bag and throwing supplies inside. "Now." "What happened?" "Armed men. 5, maybe 6. They're looking for a pregnant woman." Clara's blood ran cold. She knew exactly who they were. "It's Jedediah," she whispered. "He came for me." Nahuel stopped packing and looked at her. "Who is Jedediah?" Clara told him everything. How Jedediah had seduced her with promises of marriage. How he abandoned her when he learned of the pregnancy. How her family had cast her out due to shame. "But why would he come back now?" she asked, confused. The answer came in the form of voices outside the cabin. "We know you're in there, Clara," shouted a voice she recognized immediately. "Jedediah. Come out and no one gets hurt." Nahuel moved like a wildcat, grabbing his bow and quiver of arrows. He gestured for Clara to be quiet and positioned himself beside the window. "What do you want, Jedediah?" Clara yelled, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want to talk about the baby." Clara looked at Nahuel, confused. Why would Jedediah care about the baby now? "You can talk from out there," she shouted back. There was a pause. Then Jedediah's voice changed. It grew colder, more calculating. "My father died, Clara. I inherited all his businesses. I need a legitimate heir to secure certain transactions." The truth hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Jedediah hadn't come back out of love or regret. He had come back because he needed the baby for his financial interests. "What if I refuse?" she shouted. "Then I'll take the baby by force and kill anyone who's helping me." Nahuel growled softly, like a wolf protecting its pack. His hands tightened on the bow. "How many men are out there?" Clara whispered. "6," Nahuel said, peering through the crack in the window. "All armed, but they're nervous. They don't like being in Apache territory. Do you have a chance against them?" Nahuel looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't just determination, it was controlled fury. "I won't let anyone hurt you or Michael." The way he said the baby's name, as if he were truly his son, made Clara's heart beat faster. "5 minutes, Clara!" Jedediah yelled from outside. "Or we're coming in." Nahuel approached her and held her face with both hands. "Listen closely," he said, looking into her eyes. "There's a passage at the back of the cabin. It leads to a hidden cave in the rocks. You'll take Michael and go out that way. And you? I'll buy you time to escape." "No," Clara said, grabbing his wrist. "I won't let you die for us." "Clara." "No," she said with more firmness than she had ever spoken in her life. "We're a family now. Families stick together." Nahuel looked at her as if she had said something impossible. His eyes filled with an emotion he tried to hide, but couldn't. "A family," he repeated, as if testing the words. "A family," Clara confirmed. At that moment, Michael woke up and started crying. The sound carried through the cabin walls. "I heard that," Jedediah shouted. "The baby's born. Perfect." Nahuel closed his eyes for a second, making quick calculations. When he opened them, his expression had completely changed. He was no longer the gentle man who had cared for her for weeks. He was an Apache warrior. "Then we'll fight together," he said. "You know Jedediah better than I do. How does he think?" Clara forced her brain to work despite the fear. She had known Jedediah since childhood. She knew his weaknesses. "He's a coward," she said. "Always has been. He lets others do the dirty work and stays in the back. If we can scare his men, they'll run and leave him alone," Nahuel completed. "Exactly." Nahuel smiled for the first time since the men arrived. It wasn't a gentle smile. It was the smile of a predator. "Then let's scare them." He moved through the cabin like a ghost, extinguishing the fire, closing the windows, plunging the place into darkness. "What are you doing?" Clara whispered. "Something I learned when I was young," Nahuel said, painting dark stripes on his face with ashes from the fire. "White men fear what they cannot see." He turned to her, and Clara barely recognized him. With the stripes on his face and his eyes gleaming in the darkness, he truly looked like a warrior from ancient times. "When I go out, they'll focus on me," he said. "You go out the back passage with Michael and go to the cave. If I don't come back in an hour—" "You'll come back," Clara said with conviction. Nahuel paused, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "How can you be so sure?" Clara moved closer to him. For the first time, it was she who touched his face, tracing one of the stripes with her finger. "Because you're Nahuel, and Nahuel doesn't give up on the people he loves." The words hung in the air between them. Clara could barely believe she had said that, but she didn't regret it. Nahuel covered her hand with his. "Clara, Later," she said, placing Michael in his arms for a moment to prepare to flee. "You can tell me later." See, Nahuel held the baby as if he were the most precious thing in the world. He kissed Michael's small forehead and whispered something in Apache. "What did you say?" Clara asked. "I said his father would be back soon." Clara felt her eyes fill with tears, but she didn't let them fall. This was not the time to cry. It was the time to be strong. "Time's up!" Jedediah yelled from outside. Nahuel handed Michael back to Clara and kissed her forehead, as he had done with the baby. "1 hour," he said. "Wait for me for 1 hour." and he disappeared into the darkness of the cabin like a night spirit. Clara heard the front door open slowly. Then, the most complete silence she had ever experienced. Holding Michael close to her chest, she headed for the secret passage at the back of the cabin. But before she left, she turned one last time. "Come back to me," she whispered into the darkness. "Come back to us." And then she disappeared through the passage, carrying her son and the hope that the man who had saved her life would be able to save his own. Clara ran through the dark passage as she had never run before, holding Michael to her chest. The cave was only 100 yards from the cabin, but it felt like an eternity. Every sound made her jump. Was it Nahuel? Was it one of Jedediah's men? When she finally reached the cave hidden among the rocks, Clara hid deep inside, gasping for breath. Michael cried softly as if sensing the danger. She gently swayed him, whispering words of comfort. "Shh, my love. Daddy will be back," he promised. Daddy. The word came out naturally, and Clara realized that's exactly how she saw Nahuel now. It didn't matter that Jedediah was the biological father. Nahuel was the one who had been present, who had cared, who loved. Suddenly shouts echoed from outside. Clara recognized Jedediah's voice, but there was fear in it now. "Where is he? Where's the damn savage?" "He vanished, boss," another man shouted. "Like a ghost." Clara smiled in the dark. Nahuel was doing exactly what he said he would, scaring Jedediah's men. She had known Jedediah since childhood. She knew he always depended on others to do the dirty work. If he could separate his men, a cry of pain cut through the night. Then another. Clara counted mentally. 2 of Jedediah's men were already out of commission. "Get back here, you cowards!" Jedediah roared. But his voice was more distant now. The men were fleeing, leaving him alone. Clara began to feel hope. Nahuel was winning. But then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps approaching the cave. Footsteps of someone who knew exactly where she was. Jedediah's silhouette appeared at the cave entrance. Even in the darkness, Clara could see he was holding a pistol. "Thought you could hide from me, Clara?" Jedediah looked different. Thinner, with deep circles under his eyes and travel-stained clothes. But what frightened Clara most was the look in his eyes. There was a madness there she had never seen before. "How did you find me?" she whispered, backing further into the cave. Jedediah laughed, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. "I know this region better than you think. I spent months here hunting. Other things." He moved closer, the gun pointed at her. "Come, Clara, bring my son. We have to leave before your Apache protector returns." "He's not your son," Clara said, finding courage she didn't know she had. "You abandoned him before he was even born." "He has my blood," Jedediah growled. "That's what matters. I need him to claim my father's inheritance." "And then, will you discard us again when you don't need us anymore?" Jedediah shrugged as if it were obvious. "You were always smart, Clara. Too bad you were always too plain for me to genuinely marry." The words should have hurt. Months ago, they would have shattered Clara. But now she looked at Jedediah, really looked, and saw what had always been there, but she had refused to see. A weak man, a coward, cruel. "You know something, Jedediah?" she said, slowly standing up. Thank you. He seemed confused. "For abandoning me, for showing me who you really are. Because now I know the difference between a real man and a spoiled boy." Jedediah growled and lunged at her, but stopped when a voice echoed at the cave entrance. "Drop the weapon!" Nahuel stood at the entrance, his bow taut with an arrow pointed at Jedediah's chest. His clothes were torn, and there was blood on his arms. But he was alive. He was standing. "The famous Apache protector," Jedediah said, turning his pistol towards Nahuel. "I killed 4 of your people 6 months ago. It'll be a pleasure to kill the 5th. Clara felt the world stop. Jedediah had killed Apaches. That's why he was fleeing. He wasn't just a coward, he was a murderer. But it was Nahuel's reaction that scared her. He became completely motionless, only his eyes narrowing dangerously. 4 Apaches. Nahuel repeated, his voice low and deadly. Where? Downstream. They were hunting near my father's land, just savages, really. A pregnant woman. Nahuel's voice was growing more dangerous with each word. A small boy. Jedediah smiled cruelly. Oh, you knew them. What a shame. The woman begged for her son's life before she died. Clara saw something die in Nahuel's eyes, and something far more dangerous be born in its place. You killed my family, he said, and each word was like the sound of a grave closing. Your family? Jedediah laughed. So you're the husband who wasn't there to protect them. How ironic. Clara saw Nahuel begin to tremble with rage. The arrow in his bow was quivering with tension. But then she noticed something terrible. Jedediah was using the revelation to distract Nahuel. His pistol was moving slowly, pointing at her and Michael. Nahuel! She cried. Jedediah pulled the trigger. Time seemed to slow. Clara saw the flame burst from the gun. She saw Nahuel release the arrow at the same instant. She saw Jedediah stumble backward with the arrow in his chest, but she also felt fire in her left shoulder. The bullet had hit her. Clara fell, shielding Michael with her body. The baby cried desperately but was unharmed. Nahuel was by her side in seconds, pressing his hands to the wound. Clara! Clara! Stay with me! Michael, she whispered. Is Michael okay? He's fine. You protected him. Clara looked over Nahuel's shoulder. Jedediah lay near the cave wall, the arrow piercing his chest. His eyes were open, but empty. Is he dead? She asked. Yes, Nahuel said simply. It's over. Clara closed her eyes, feeling a deep relief. Not just because the threat had passed, but because she was finally free. Free from Jedediah, free from fear, free from shame. Nahuel, she said, opening her eyes and looking directly into his. He killed your family. I know. And you saved me anyway, saved the son of the man who... Clara, Nahuel interrupted her, touching her face gently. You are not responsible for what he did. Michael is not responsible. You are innocent. But if you hadn't found me, you would have found Jedediah sooner. You would have had your revenge. Nahuel shook his head. If I hadn't found you, I'd still be wandering the desert like a ghost, carrying hate. You brought me back to life, Clara. You both gave me a reason to live again. Clara felt tears stream down her face. Not from pain, but from a happiness so intense she didn't know how to contain it. I love you, she said, the words coming out before she could think. I love you, Nahuel. Nahuel stopped pressing the wound for a moment. He looked into her eyes as if seeing her for the first time. I love you too, he said. And Clara saw that it wasn't just passion. It was something deeper. It was choice. It was commitment. It was forever. He leaned in and kissed her gently, with all the care in the world. When they parted, Clara smiled through her tears. Now, we're truly a family, she said. Now we're truly a family, Nahuel agreed. In the weeks that followed, Clara recovered quickly from the shoulder wound. Nahuel cared for her with the same patience as always, but now there was something different between them. They no longer needed to hide their feelings. They no longer needed to fear the future. One morning, Clara woke to find Nahuel sitting outside the cabin, watching Michael play on a blanket on the ground. The baby was already 2 months old and had started to smile when he saw Nahuel approach. What are you thinking about? Clara asked, sitting beside him. How strange life is, Nahuel said. I lost a family and thought I'd never recover. But fate brought me another family, different, but equally precious. Clara held his hand. Will you marry me? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Nahuel looked at her, surprised. A white woman asking an Apache man to marry her? A woman asking the man she loves to marry her, Clara corrected. Nahuel smiled, that true smile she loved so much. Yes, he said simply. I want to marry you. What about Michael? Michael is my son, Nahuel said without hesitation, in every way that matters. That afternoon they married according to Apache customs, just the three of them. Nahuel spoke words in his people's tongue, promising to protect and love Clara and Michael forever. Clara responded in English, but the meaning was the same. There was no church, no family to witness, no celebration. But there was love, true love, built on trust, respect, and mutual care. 6 months later, Clara was pregnant again. This time, it would truly be Nahuel's child. But when she told him, Nahuel just smiled and placed his hand on her belly. 2 children, he said, Michael and this new baby, both equally mine. Clara looked at Michael, who now crawled around the cabin and called Nahuel Daddy in his first words. She looked at the man who had saved her life and given her a family. She looked at the life they had built together. A year earlier, she had been dying in the desert, rejected and alone. Now, she was living a life full of love, purpose, and happiness. Thank you, she whispered to Nahuel. For what? For teaching me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about staying when things get tough. It's about loving unconditionally. Nahuel kissed her gently. Thank you, he said, for teaching me that it's possible to love again after losing everything. That night, sitting around the campfire, Clara looked at the stars in the Arizona sky. The same sky that had witnessed her despair now witnessed her happiness. She had found her place in the world, not with the family she was born into, but with the family she chose. And for the first time in her life, Clara Miller, now Clara, wife of Nahuel, felt complete. Clara and Nahuel epilogue, Seeds in the Desert. 5 years later. The Arizona sun still burned brightly, but now Clara didn't see it as an enemy. Sitting in the shade of the porch Nahuel had built onto the cabin, expanded to accommodate their growing family, she watched their children playing in the yard. Michael, now 5, was a strong, laughing child who followed Nahuel everywhere. He had his mother's dark eyes, but the calm, observant manner of the man he considered his father. Beside him, little Hope, 3 years old, chased a butterfly with her plump hands outstretched. She had inherited her father's Apache features, straight black hair and eyes as deep as night. And in Clara's lap, sleeping peacefully, was Isabel, just 6 months old, the result of the love that continued to grow between her and Nahuel every day. "Daddy!" Michael shouted, running towards Nahuel, who was returning from hunting with 2 rabbits. "You're back!" Clara smiled, watching Nahuel squat to hug the boy. No matter how many times she saw this scene, it still moved her. Nahuel had become the father Michael would never have had with Jedediah. Patient, present, affectionate, but also firm when necessary. "How was the hunt?" Hope asked, grabbing her father's leg with her small arms. "Prosperous," Nahuel replied, picking up the girl. "And how was your day?" "Michael taught me how to make an arrow," Hope said proudly. "Really?" Nahuel looked at Michael with approval. "You're becoming a good teacher, son." Son. The word still made Clara's heart race. Nahuel never differentiated between Michael and the girls. To him, all 3 were equally his children. Nahuel approached the porch and kissed Clara gently before looking at Isabel sleeping. "How has she been today?" "Quiet. I think she's dreaming of you," Clara said, seeing the baby smile in her sleep. Over the past 5 years, Clara had completely transformed. Not just outwardly, though love and happiness had given a special glow to her face, but inwardly, the shy, rejected woman had become a confident wife and loving mother. She had learned to speak Apache to communicate better with her husband. She had learned about medicinal herbs. She had learned to shoot a bow to help with hunting. But most importantly, she had learned to love herself. "Clara," Nahuel said, sitting beside her on the porch, "I need to tell you something." Something in his tone made Clara look at him carefully. "What is it?" "Today, when I was hunting, I found tracks, many horses, soldiers." Clara's stomach tightened. For the past few years, they had lived in relative peace. But they always knew that one day the outside world might find them again. "Are they coming here?" "I don't know, but I think we should be prepared to leave if necessary." Clara looked around, at the cabin that had become their home, at the yard where their children played, at the hills she knew like the back of her hand. "What if we have to leave all this?" she asked. Nahuel held her free hand. "Then we'll find another place. What matters isn't where we are, Clara. It's being together." Clara smiled. 5 years ago, the idea of leaving everything behind would have terrified her. Now she knew that as long as she had Nahuel and the children, she had everything she needed. "Michael!" she called. "Hope, come here!" The children ran to the porch. Michael sat beside Nahuel, while Hope climbed onto her mother's lap, careful not to wake the baby. "We want to talk to you about a possible journey," Clara said. "Where to?" Michael asked, always the more serious of the two. "Perhaps to Mexico," Nahuel said, "to find other Apaches who live in peace there." "Can I bring my bow?" Michael asked. "Of course," Nahuel smiled. "And can I bring my corn husk doll?" Hope asked. "You can bring everything that's important," Clara said. "Then it's okay," Michael said with the wisdom of a child. "Family is more important than a place anyway." Clara and Nahuel exchanged glances, impressed by the boy's maturity. "Who taught you that?" Nahuel asked. "You," Michael replied simply. "You always say family is about people, not houses." At that moment, Clara knew they had raised their children right. They understood what truly mattered in life. That night, after putting the children to sleep, Clara and Nahuel sat outside, watching the stars. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Of having to leave?" "No," Nahuel said. "We've left before and found something better. If we need to leave again, we'll do it together." "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life," Clara said. 5 years ago I was dying in the desert, alone, without hope. And now, Clara looked at the cabin where her 3 children slept peacefully. She looked at the man beside her, strong, gentle, loyal, who had transformed her life into something she never dreamed possible. "Now I know that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what's truly worthwhile," she said. Nahuel pulled her closer, and Clara snuggled against his chest. "You know what impresses me most?" he said. "What?" "How you became exactly who you always were inside. Strong, brave, loving. I didn't change you, Clara. I just helped you find who you already were." Clara felt her eyes fill with tears of gratitude. "And you found your peace," she said. "After so much loss, so much hate, you found your way back to love." They sat in silence for a while, simply enjoying each other's company and the life they had built. "Nahuel," Clara said finally. "Yes? If we had to choose everything again, if we could go back to the beginning and choose different paths, would you choose the same path?" Nahuel didn't hesitate for a second. Without a doubt, every pain, every loss, every difficult moment, it was all worth it to get here, to get to you, to our family. Clara smiled in the dark. She too would choose the same path. Every humiliation, every rejection, every moment of despair had been necessary to lead her to this man, to this life, to this happiness. "Then no matter what happens tomorrow," she said, "we've already won. We've already won." Nahuel agreed, kissing the top of her head. And there, under the Arizona stars, with their children sleeping safely and their love growing every day, Clara and Nahuel continued to write the most improbable and truest love story the desert had ever witnessed. A story that began with pain and transformed into hope. A story that proved that family is not about blood, but about choice. A story that showed that sometimes the most beautiful seeds grow in the most arid lands.